Okay, welcome everybody. We're glad that you're back for day 2. I want to go over a few logistics first before we get started. It'll be the same format as yesterday. So the first half of the session will be on theory. We'll take a break, we'll stop, and then we'll do questions and answers. And then we'll take about a 10-minute break. We'll come back and then we'll do the practice. And the same format, we'll go through our slides on the practice, and then at the end of that, we'll go ahead and take questions and answers. So you can type your question and answers into the chat box, and then we will get them from there. Okay, any other logistics? I think we're good, and we'll wait till you hit recording. Okay.
Is it recording there on Zoom too? All right. All right. Very good.
Okay. All right. So here we go. Today is on the absolute, but first, we want to do a quick recap on a cosmic perspective of human nature is what we went over yesterday. So we talked about the law of correspondence. Man, or the thinker, is the microcosm. As he is so, then all the hierarchies of the heavens exist within him. But in truth, there is neither macrocosm nor microcosm, but one existence. Great and small are such only as viewed by a limited consciousness. So when we're talking about the higher principles, we're talking about something that our words limit by the very talking of them. So that's what this latter part of this quote says.
Yes, so we saw yesterday that this law of correspondences is essential in what we are trying to present in this week. That is how to apply the cosmic teachings about cosmic, principles, etc., into human principles. And that's what the concept of the keys of interpretation come in.
So there are 7 keys of interpretation to every symbol and allegory. That which may not fit a meaning, say from a psychological or astronomical aspect, will be found quite correct from a physical or a metaphysical aspect.
So yeah, basically we discussed at length how any concept in the secret doctrine that is explaining some esoteric principle can be interpreted on different levels as referring to astronomical things or to human or celestial, etc. And that's what we are doing this week, as I mentioned.
So, but we're using the psychological key.
Yes.
Mainly.
Yes. Out of those 7 keys, Blavatsky says that in the secret doctrine, she tried to approach it mainly with 3 or 4 keys, she said. Those keys are she doesn't mention, but looking at the content of the secret doctrine, you can guess that the keys that she used were the astronomical, the anthropological, the theogonical that we explained has to do with celestial beings. Those 3, maybe the metaphysical, there is a lot of metaphysics there. She did not interpret the teachings using the psychological key, which is a little strange, although she mentions that psychological key, because it is very important. The psychological key is the one that allows us to apply all this into our own life and consciousness. But if you read her quotes about the secret doctrine and the hints that she gave about the psychological key, this is what she was expecting that we should do, because we may not know what happens astronomically or anthropologically in the past, but we have direct access to our own psyche. So it is in trying to apply this key, we develop our intuition.
Okay, and then here we go with the absolute. What is that which was, is, and will be? whether there is a universe or not, whether there be gods or none.
Yeah, there is this is a famous question in the proem of the Secret Doctrine. You know, what is the one thing that is eternal, that has always been there, is there right now when there is manifestation, and will be there even when manifestation finishes.
And so what I did was put together some synonyms for the absolute, so that from your studies or in your readings or what you've gotten out of the Secret Doctrine or any of the other teachings, it helps to put a little more tag into what the absolute is. So besides the absolute, we have the absolute reality, beingness, one life, Parabrahman, Sat, Adi Buddha, Ein Sof, absolute abstract space, absolute abstract motion, absolute abstract duration, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes, that's a problem with the Secret Doctrine. She uses many synonyms there. And the first stage in the study of the Secret Doctrine is to be familiar with all of this. Now, Michelle is giving there some synonyms for the absolute, because the answer that the Secret Doctrine gives to this question is that the only thing that is there always is the absolute reality, which one of the synonyms, as she says, is space. In particular, when talking about the absolute aspect of space, as she does in the Secret Doctrine, in the proem, she calls it absolute abstract space, as we are going to see later.
And I think just a little disclaimer before we get going, in conversation, we name the three aspects of the absolute. So it's absolute abstract space, absolute abstract motion, absolute abstract duration. But Madame Blavatsky also uses that throughout her writings, as she'll talk about the absolute and then she'll call it the absolute abstract space. That's what Pablo was talking about here, or motion or duration. And so that can be a little confusing. So I think try to hold that loosely and not categorize all that, because it's kind of all the same thing, as we'll see in this next quote here. Okay. All right. The Secret Doctrine establishes an omnipresent. I'll just go one by one. Omnipresent, which means present in all places and all times. Eternal, continue without intermission, seemingly endless, having infinite duration. Boundless, transcends any opposites. Immutable, cannot grow, change, or evolve. All of those a step beyond, and that's what the absolute is.
Now, it's important that in this, Blavatsky says, as we are going to see, that the absolute reality is really beyond thoughts. And we will see that a little more. So we cannot really define the absolute. What we can say basically is what the absolute is not. The absolute is nothing that we perceive through our senses, because all we perceive through our senses is relative, limited, manifested. So all these definitions that may seem like a positive definition, positive in the sense that you are saying that the absolute is there, are actually negative definitions, because omnipresent means the absolute cannot be pinpointed to any point in space. So omnipresent means nowhere in space specifically. Then eternal is something that is not affected by time. Then boundless, not affected by limitations. Immutable, not affected by time, by change. So even though we have these words actually are saying those things that position in space, limits, time, the absolute is not. So this is a negative definition, negative philosophically speaking, a negation of the things that we know about.
On which all speculation is impossible, since it transcends the power of human conception and could only be dwarfed by any human expression or similitude. It is beyond the range and reach of thought, in the words of the Mandukya Upanishad, unthinkable and unspeakable. And so this ties in with what we talked about yesterday, trying to get away from our personal self and dwell in the spaciousness. This is where we'll find, or this is where we'll experience, or this we'll get a glimpse of what the absolute is.
Yes, as we are going to see in the process of meditation, remember that Blavatsky said, as we read yesterday, that the absolute is a perfect analogy to our true self, to the higher self, which is not only ours, it's a universal self. This is what we are. So if you want to find your true self, it is beyond thoughts, beyond words. It is unthinkable, unspeakable. It is beyond the realm of change. It is beyond the realm of time. You have to apply all this in your search for meditation. You search for that which never changes. Thoughts, emotions, sensations, they are always changing. That's not your real self. Search for that that has no limits. Your body has a limit. It is here and not there. Search for something that is not affected by time. Your body is born and dies. You see, so what we are going to show is that all this description of the absolute that normally we think is something out there is a description of you and is a clue to how you can find your true self.
The one absolute reality antecedes all manifested, conditioned being. The infinite and eternal cause is the rootless root of all that was, is, or ever shall be.
So here again, we will show a few things that Blavatsky says about the absolute. So the absolute reality in you antecedes all conditioned being. Your sense of I-ness is not your true self. Your true self antecedes, is beyond, is prior to your sense of I am this or that. So again, this is what we need to find in ourselves.
And that's all beings, all everything is what emanates, transforms from the absolute or within the absolute.
Yeah, as she says, they are your true, again, let us interpret it in terms of ourselves, because this is ourselves. You are the root of all, the rootless root of all that was, is, and ever shall be. Now, when we say you, we are not saying you, Pablo, Michelle, etc. We are saying the true you. When we say you are the root of all beings, that means you are not your personality alone only. Your personality is part of the manifestation of your true being. This is what all mystics discover. They discover when they get to the bottom of who we are, they discover that they are everywhere, that they can feel what the bird feels and that they can feel what the grass feels. At the bottom of our being, we are the root of everything.
Now, the mystics do it more on a spontaneous basis. What we have here in Theosophy is kind of a little bit more of a roadmap, that because we're going to see once we get to the exercises that the idea in our meditation or in our quiet time or when we're outside is to try to loosen those boundaries that separate me and the bird, me and the tree. And so it's just like we talked about yesterday. It's a skill that can be practiced to get closer to what the mystics get to.
Mm-hmm.
All right, it is an omnipresent reality, latent in every atom in the universe, and is the universe itself. So nothing is not part of the absolute, nothing comes from the absolute and leaves the absolute behind. And as we'll see, that as it, and even words are clumsy. Mm-hmm. So as we'll see, as it unfolds, we'll see that that which is the absolute is the basis for spirit, matter, and energy from which our manifested universe is.
Yeah. Yes, words, this is exactly what Blavatsky said. Whatever you say about the absolute is not quite correct. We can't really define the absolute. However, she wrote quite a bit about the absolute because it is good to think about this. The result of thinking meditating systematically about this, the result is a silent mind. When we really understand the limitations of our thoughts, our perceptions, our knowledge, that leads us to a silent mind. And that silent mind is reflecting the absolute reality. So it's important to deal with this and be aware how our words are not quite correct. Now, if we look at the absolute as the divine out there, different from us, which many people do, this is basically a mistake. I mean, we can choose, and we will show, we can choose whether to look at the absolute as in the third person perspective, as an it out there, or look at the absolute as ourselves in the first person perspective. If we look at the absolute as an it, as a deity, let's say, what this is saying is that this divine nature is latent in every atom. So ponder over that, meditate on that. What does it mean that the absolute, that this microphone, that the camera that you are seeing in front of you, or the computer, is the absolute? What does it mean? In what way? How is it, what are the implications? So all these things are important aspects to ponder over as we study the secret doctrine.
I think we're handicapped in general in two ways. One, we don't like to ponder on stuff, and we touched on this yesterday. We don't like to ponder on stuff that we don't know the answer to. So just to sit in that uncomfortable spot of unknowing can seem odd at first, but as we do it more, we're changing the way our mind thinks, because that's the second thing I was going to say. Don't you think that we're a little handicapped being from mostly a Christian base, that the deity or God was always out there? So we're not used to having that oneness from the first person perspective, that we are the deity.
Yeah, definitely. It is a difficult concept to grasp, and to grasp correctly. In the New Age, there is this idea that we are divine, and many times that's misunderstood. And many times the idea I am a God is that I, as Pablo, as a personality, am a God. And that is obviously not true, because if God, let's say, is omnipresent, Pablo is not omnipresent. It is here and not there. And we can say the same with everything else. So when we say you are the divine, we are saying you are essentially the divine. That doesn't mean that the body and the personality is not part of the divine. This is a question of perspective. If you think that the fragment is the whole, that's where the problem comes. If you think that the personality, this little fragment of what you really are, is the whole, this is illusion. If you understand you are the whole, then the personality is part of the whole, is divine because it's part of the whole, but you are not limited to your personality. So this idea that we are the absolute reality, that we are divine, we need to understand it properly. Otherwise, it just feeds into the selfishness and egocentrism, and think I'm the divine and I can bend the universe to my desires and use all these powers to what I want because I'm God.
And unfortunately, we can see that a little bit when we take on that is the creative part of our mind, that which we put our energy to, or give our thoughts to. We can create. So we can do some of what the New Age is saying, that we can create this, we can create abundance, we can create romance. But I think we forget that, first of all, it's a selfish way to create things, or it's a selfish creation of things. And then we take nowhere into account of our karma and how that works.
Yeah, that's a interesting and complex subject itself. Blavatsky and theosophists in general would say that the right way to use our creative powers is from the point of view of the unity, for the general good, And when you have the general good in mind, that's also your particular good if you are thinking of you as a separate entity. But turning everything around and focusing on you, that's something that always results in suffering, because the purpose of suffering is to show you that you are not a separate entity from the rest.
The absolute is impersonal because it contains all and everything. Its impersonality is the fundamental conception of the system. It is essentially without any relation to manifested finite being. It is beingness or sat rather than being.
This is part of what Michelle was mentioning. It is impersonal, and for us, it's really hard to grasp the idea of impersonality. Because we live in the personality, the impression we have is that something that is impersonal is nothing, is something bland, is something empty. It's like we can't appreciate anything that is not personal. So when we think of God, we think of a person out there, a divine person, big, in whatever way we picture it. All powerful, but it's a person. Now, Blavatsky says the fundamental conception of the esoteric philosophy is that the divine is impersonal. And that is very appealing if you have a taste of what impersonal is. If not, it's not appealing at all. But again, as in meditation, all the problems are in the sphere of the personal. The problems are about my desires, about my fears, about my anxieties, about all of this. When we can tap into a more impersonal state of consciousness, those things cease to be problems. Of course, the body may need certain things, the mind and emotions may need certain things, and we can address them, but the identification with that disappears, and you find that in the impersonal, there is peace. It's not that you are not there in the impersonal. Impersonal means you are there, but unencumbered by all these things that we are constantly identifying with. So in a similar way, the divine is impersonal, and because it is impersonal, it is the source of peace, bliss, harmony, everything that we normally think of.
I was thinking about that Tonglen, Buddhist Tonglen meditation, to get from the step, because it's difficult to go from personal to impersonality. So the in-between would be, so if I'm feeling anxious, the tongue, as I remember it, the Tonglen meditation is taking in like the anxiety of everything around me, so everybody else's, and kind of transforming it into its opposite, so confidence. So, and that can be done anywhere at any time. So would you say that that's like a transitory step? Or?
Yeah, it is. You have to be, I have my reservations in the sense that you have to be strong enough. If you are a sensitive person and you take in the anxiety around, it can rattle you. So you have to be coming from a place of equanimity, etc. And it's a wonderful act. Actually, that's part of the theosophical ideal, to be transformers of this energy. But it has to be done in the right context with the right knowledge.
Right, in the middle of a crisis is not the time to start that practice.
But it is part of what you are mentioning, the principle of starting to look at yourself and your life in the context of the greater good. That is what will bring happiness, peace, etc. It's not by emphasizing the separate that we will reach those things, because the separate is what produces the opposite to happiness and joy, etc. So it's important, again, when you search for your true nature, and we will see this, you have to search for the impersonal in you. I think Light on the Path says, in the impersonal, look within and you discover you are Buddha, the enlightened.
So I just want to read some more, I always call it the name game, some more synonyms for the absolute and beingness. So absolute beingness, not being, the one secondless, undivided and indivisible all, root of all nature, visible and invisible, objective and subjective, to be sensed by the highest spiritual intuition, but never to be fully comprehended.
If we think, let's stay there for a second. If we think about that, that has to do with the second quote. Do we have a relationship with the absolute? What does that question imply?
Can we?
Yeah, or can we have a relationship? Because Blavatsky says essentially without any relation to finite being. So what does it mean? Again, we think, okay, the absolute must be the divine out there, but somehow we have no relationship with it. The divine doesn't care about us. You can construe it in that way. But think of what the question, can I have a relationship with the absolute means? That means that you and the absolute are different. That means that you are not the absolute. In what Michelle was saying, it is the one without a second. There are not two. There is not the absolute and you. There is only the absolute. Undivided. There is no division between you and the absolute, etc., etc. You cannot have a relationship with the absolute because you are the absolute. You can realize that you are the absolute reality, or you cannot, or you can be ignorant of that, but you cannot have a relationship with it as if it was a separate thing. So that's important. Again, our religious, growing education doesn't really help us much in general, at least in the West, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, doesn't help us with this. Although it is present, if you see in Christian mysticism, in the Godhead, it's very similar to this. In Islam, they also, when they define Allah, it's very non-dual, and that's why in Islam you cannot picture, Allah, etc., because it's beyond words, beyond images, beyond limitations. So this, and in Judaism you have Ein Sof, in the Kabbalah specifically. So all these things are there, but what is normally known, what the different religions, portray normally is not this. I understand it's not easy to relate to it. This
Right,
is a
'cause
more
I was gonna
esoteric
say,
approach.
yeah, if you say I can't have a relationship with the absolute, and I say, well, all I know is either I have a relationship with something or I don't have a relationship, I'm not sure what that non-relationship is. So that's something that is kind of, that we have to hold and hold softly until we're able to break into a new consciousness or a new perception.
Yeah, it forces you to drop the duality and the idea, I am a separate part that want to relate to the divine. What this forces you to is to realize that you are the divine. And of course, you have to attain that realization. It's not just a statement, okay, I'm the divine, but you are still aware only of your personal nature. What this challenges us to do is to realize that you are the divine.
The absolute is, of course, devoid of all attributes. It is best described as neither spirit nor matter, but both. And I have here the Theosophical Glossary defines it as, not really defines it, but writes about it as incomprehensible entity. For it is no more an entity than a non-entity, but both. So there's that neither, nor, but, and both.
Yeah, and that again, meditate on that and you'll see that it makes sense. Would you say that the absolute is good? Well, many people would say yes, of course. So what does it mean? How do you explain evil? Is evil outside of the absolute? If evil is outside of the absolute, then we are not talking about the absolute. Absolute means the totality. Nothing can be outside of the absolute. In the Christian tradition, as soon as you say that God is good, then you have to postulate something else than God that is not good. So that's the problem with duality. So the absolute, you cannot say that the absolute is good or evil, or good and evil. What the absolute is something that transcends both. It's a little like the zero. Is the zero positive or negative? It's neither. All positive numbers and all negative numbers are contained within the zero. Zero is the synthesis of them. It's not that zero is both. I mean, you can say by words, as Blavatsky says, it's neither nor both, you know, but if you have +1 -1, that yields 0. So within the 0 is the possibility of +1 and -1. But 0 itself is neither of them. You have +1 and -1 when you introduce duality, you know, in during the manifestation of the universe, as we are going to see. So when you think of the absolute, think of the synthesis of everything. You cannot talk about any particular attribute. The absolute is not green, because then yellow would not be within the absolute. You see, so you cannot give any attribute to the absolute, because then you are denying the opposite. The absolute is the synthesis of all.
So the way that I thought about attempting to experience or dip into the absolute was to deconstruct. And I think tomorrow or Friday, we talk about a meditation going from the multiplicity to the unity. But this is deconstructing, where I take a triangle and I can define a triangle. I can see a triangle. I can see all the different versions of triangles. And then if I take it one step beyond a physical triangle, then I can say, okay, so what are the pieces of the triangle? So I have the sides or the lines and the angles and the parts of the triangle. Well, then if I deconstruct it one more, then I have just the essence of the triangle. And I can't describe what that essence looks like, because then I'm dropping back into the intermediate stage where I'm describing the parts. So that's one way that, like, my mind can practice deconstructing what the absolute is.
Yeah, from manifestation into...
Right.
Yeah, actually, Annie Besant recommends a meditation with the triangles, and Blavatsky too, trying to go from the manifested triangle that is they are all different. You can think of different triangles, as you said, to the essence of what a triangle is, and then beyond, where you have to leave the mind behind, basically.
If one could not suppose
No,
that...
could suppose.
Oh, if one could suppose that the eternal, infinite all, the omnipresent unity, instead of being in eternity, becomes through periodical manifestation a manifold universe and a multiple personality, that unity would cease to be one. So I think this is, to me, this sounds like a matter of perception. Where am I looking at this from? If I'm looking at it from the manifested universe, my personality, then I see separateness. But if I can talk myself around it, then I know that, no, this is really all just one.
Yes, and also the idea here is that even though there may be multiplicity, the absolute is never lost in that multiplicity. So she says, for example, if one could suppose that the absolute becomes the manifold universe, that the absolute is transformed into the many, then we would lose the absolute aspect. We would lose the unity. The unity is never lost. When there is manifestation, that manifestation is not really overcoming the unity. So in, I don't know, Advaita Vedanta, for example, this is the reason why they say multiplicity is an illusion. We are never outside the unity. It looks like there is multiplicity, but the unity is always there. So we can look at it in that way. We can say, okay, the multiplicity is an illusion. And the theosophical tradition accepts the idea of illusion, but it puts a purpose in the illusion. Normally in the Advaita Vedanta, the idea is that you just have to get rid of the illusion. The theosophical tradition says, well, there is a purpose for the illusion, not that you have to linger in the illusion, but there is a reason why you have this illusion.
And is this a good place for the example of the fingers on the hand?
Yeah.
So yeah, our fingers look all separate. They each do something different. They each have a different name, but they're really part of the hand and could not function without the hand.
Yeah, and anything that happens to, if you poison one finger, it will poison the whole hand, you know, even though if you look at the tips, they seem to be independent, for example. And there are many examples. A typical example in Vedanta would be the absolute is like the clay or gold, let's say. With gold, you can generate a multiplicity of forms, you know, an earring, a necklace, and this and that. And it seems that you have all different objects, but they are essentially just gold. The gold was never modified or affected. This is just gold, and the forms are temporary appearances.
This beingness is symbolized in the secret doctrine under two aspects: absolute abstract space and absolute abstract motion.
Yeah, so we'll see this.
Yeah, so first we're going to look at absolute abstract space. Absolute abstract space represents bare subjectivity, the one thing which no human mind can either exclude from any conception or conceive of by itself. The one all is like space, which is its only mental and physical representation on this earth, or our plane of existence. Neither an object of nor a subject to perception.
So this is interesting. HPV says, if you want to represent mentally the absolute, the only representation you have, you know, available would be space. And this is why she uses absolute abstract space. Now, when we talk about space, we have to realize that she's talking about an absolute aspect of space, absolute and abstract. We normally know relative space, the space between me and the computer, for example. Imagine the cosmos with no planets, with nothing but yourself, let's say. How do you measure space? How do you perceive space? Would you perceive anything? You can perceive space only between you and something else. But if there is nothing else, do you perceive space or you perceive nothingness? You cannot, this is what Blavatsky says, space is not an object of perception. You never perceive space, space in its absolute nature. And it's not a subject of perception. A subject of perception is the person, a person that perceives. So she said, space is beyond that duality, the knower and the known, the seer and the seen. Space is beyond, and in itself is abstract. So the absolute could be compared with space, and this has an impact in meditation. We'll see this also. When we move away from the personal, the sensation that comes in us is one of spaciousness. That's a natural sensation. It's not that we visualize space. When we get away from the identification with the contents of consciousness, we start feeling that we are the space. And that's because we are getting closer to the absolute nature that is reflected in us.
So once we drop away all those parts of us that are limited, that are not eternal, that are changing, then the spaciousness is just automatically there.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You know, let go of everything that you can let go of, thoughts, emotions, sensations, memories, will, etc. What is left? And you'll see that there is left a sense of space.
Okay, so I've made this nice and organized and named everything, but we have to remember that we're still in the realm of non-naming or non-demarcation. We can't separate this out. So the absolute abstract space is the absolute. The absolute is the absolute abstract space.
Yeah, especially because in the poem, Blavatsky talks about these two aspects of the absolute abstract space and motion. And then we tend to think these are two separate
Right, it's
aspects.
come down, yeah. So that's, yeah, you know, here we have the absolute, and then from the absolute, we have the absolute abstract space and the absolute abstract motion.
Yeah, all that is, I mean, it's okay when we have to talk in words, to do diagrams so that the dualistic mind can have a grasp of it. It's helpful, but it ceases to be helpful when we think we are talking about parts of the absolute. Right. The absolute is beyond parts.
Now for us, space is a word with no meaning unless we limit and condition it. But in reality, space is the most abstract thing, and space containing all is just that unknown deity which is invisible and which we cannot understand, which we can be intellectually sense.
Which we can intellectually sense. Yeah. So yeah, that's what we were talking about. We can have a sense of what we are talking about, but we cannot really picture it or perceive it.
Okay, ready? Mm-hmm. Absolute abstract motion. The one life's absolute attribute, itself eternal, is ceaseless motion, the perpetual motion of the universe, in the sense of limitless, ever-present space. That which is motionless cannot be divine, but then there is nothing in fact, in reality, absolutely motionless within the universal soul.
Mm-hmm. So you see, this is the other aspect of the absolute. And she says perpetual motion in the sense of limitless space. So she's equating here again, space and motion. So when thinking of the absolute, we have to think that there are these two aspects, space and motion, in their absolute, aspect, let's say, as absolute principles. But it's not that, again, the two things are within, like competing with each other. It's like the zero. We could say the zero has two aspects, positive and negative. It's not that the zero has the two aspects, bumping into each other. It's the synthesis of these things. When the zero is manifested in numbers, it can manifest in positive and negative numbers. So saying that the absolute has these aspects is similar. When there is manifestation within the absolute, we manifest, or there are these two things that manifest, motion and space. Actually, Blavatsky then also adds duration as another aspect. In The Secret Doctrine, she talks about the universal mind, or absolute mind as another aspect. Basically, we could say that anything that exists in manifestation is an aspect of the absolute, has to be a possibility within the absolute, otherwise it wouldn't be manifested. But the point here...
But she quantifies, or qualifies it by saying that this absolute abstract motion is the absolute, but pre-cosmic motion isn't, or cosmic motion.
Yeah, those, as isn't. We are going to see
that,
are part of the process of manifestation. But basically here, what she's saying, there are two aspects, space and motion, and the two are one, motion as the ever-present space. And again, we can see that in our consciousness. When there is deep silence and when there is the sense of spaciousness, there is not sense of deadness there. You could say that there is a sense of life, being alive. That's a sense of motion. There is motion and there is space, not the motion of the thoughts. There is the motion of simply being there, being, the life being there. I remember Krishnamurti once talking in these terms. He said, that which is beyond the mind has he says something like an extraordinary motion. But for that motion, for you to be able to tap into that motion, the motion of the thoughts and the conditioning has to cease. So we can expect to find these things in meditation in a very subtle way.
Absolute abstract motion representing unconditioned consciousness. Even our Western thinkers have shown that consciousness is inconceivable to us apart from change, and motion best symbolizes change in essential characteristic. This latter aspect of the one reality is also symbolized by the term great breath.
We can see that consciousness depends on motion. That which doesn't change goes out of the field of consciousness. If there is a smell, if it is constantly there, you stop, perceiving it. If you leave your hand on the table, if you leave it perfectly still, after a while, you don't feel it any longer. Consciousness needs contrast, change. This is the principle of yoga. Keep your mind quiet and you will stop perceiving your mind, and you will, awaken on a higher level of consciousness. So this is why Blavatsky relates motion with consciousness.
Okay, so does he or she say, motion is unconditional consciousness as space is unconditional substance? I don't know if she says that next, but
we'll see it later.
The appearance and disappearance of the universe are pictured as an outbreathing and inbreathing of the great breath. So once again, she's not separating out that absolute abstract motion is the great breath is different from the absolute. So because there's times in the Secret Doctrine that she uses great breath synonymous with the absolute.
Because it is,
right,
as you say,
right.
It is the absolute.
The great breath, being motion, is one of the three aspects of the absolute, abstract space and duration being the other two. So we're going to see duration now. During the night of the universe, time was not, for it lay asleep in the infinite bosom of duration.
So when there is no universe, there is this duration. Now, we should not, she says, I don't know how to call it. She said it somewhere, we have a word for this in the esoteric philosophy, not in any modern language. And I don't know how to translate it. She chose duration, which, is a limited concept. When we think of duration, we think of something that passes in time. The idea of duration, perhaps today, she would say something like timeless. At the time that wasn't really used, that kind of terminology. But this duration is a timeless state. It's not something that lasts forever in time, because time itself, Blavatsky says, is limited. Time will end when consciousness ends. She says time only depends on the movement of consciousness. So duration is a timeless state. And again, this is telling you who you are. So in meditation, you have to seek for that state which is beyond time. As Krishnamurti would say, time depends on thought. So if you want to get to the eternal, as we mentioned yesterday with these quotes from Light on the Path, you have to get beyond thought. When you are in that state of silent spaciousness, where there is this aliveness that is a non-defined aliveness, let's say, beyond thought, that is beyond time. That's duration.
So would you say that we could experience it? We have experienced here when you were describing that, it sounded to me like when I'm in a state of content, time's not going, my thoughts aren't moving, my body's not moving. There's just kind of a dwelling in that.
Yeah. I mean, we know that time when something is, painful or boring, then time seems to go slow.
Out.
When we are excited, then time seems to go fast. And when there is this state that Michelle calls content, or this state of poise or harmony, when there is neither excitement nor boredom, then yes, you experience little by little like this sense of timelessness. The time ceases to be a factor in consciousness.
Time is finite. It can be divided. Duration in our philosophy at least cannot. Duration is, it has neither beginning nor end, and Time is finite, it can be divided. Duration in our philosophy at least cannot. Duration is, it has neither beginning nor end, and it is outside of both time and space.
Yeah, so this is how she was trying to talk about the timeless. That's why I was saying we are not talking about something that is everlasting within time.
Time is only an illusion produced by the succession of our states of consciousness as we travel through eternal duration. And it does not exist where no consciousness exists in which the illusion can be produced.
So again, time exists as long as there is consciousness. On a universal level, time begins with manifestation. You know, on each plane in the Theosophical tradition, there are 7 planes. Each plane has its own kind of time because they have their own kind of consciousness. When all these planes are reabsorbed in the absolute, let's say, then time ceases. On a more relative way, the mental time that we are used to, that ceases when our consciousness transcends the mind. Then you will discover that you wake up to a different kind of time, and then that also can be transcended when you transcend that kind of consciousness.
Okay, so here I have a diagram.
Not yet.
Not
this is
yet,
the absolute.
Yeah. Okay, so if we start the absolute reality, and then we have its 3 aspects: absolute abstract motion, absolute abstract space, absolute abstract duration. Remembering that this isn't like a separate triad or, you know, a higher, an absolute triad, I guess, but it is part of the absolute. So then from absolute abstract motion, from all of this, we get the manifested cosmos. From absolute abstract motion, we get spirit. From absolute abstract space, we get matter. And from absolute abstract duration, we get time. So, and we can see, if I was really good, I would be able to make the upper triangle and the lower triangle come down and be on top of each other, which will be the 6-pointed star, which is in the center of the emblem, which shows that this is where we are in our stage in humanity, in the time where, or the time, this space, where we are is where we are entangled with spirit and matter, or with timelessness, the absolute reality, and the manifested cosmos.
Yeah, so we will see this in detail as we move on, but that's the basic idea. So at the level of the non-manifested cosmos, the absolute reality, you have no separation. As Michelle said, all those aspects are one thing. Then these aspects, we talk about these aspects as being different because when manifestation comes, you see these 3 principles manifested: spirit, matter, and time. And those are the manifestations of their absolute aspects.
Okay, from cosmos to man, or from cosmos to the thinker. Mind in space and eternity. First conceive of unity by expansion in space and infinite in time. Now this comes from, and we touched on part of this yesterday, from the diagram of meditation. And we talked about this substratum. From this originates a substratum of memory, which does not cease in dreaming or waking. Its manifestation is courage. With memory of universality, all dread vanishes during the dangers and trials of life. So it has this is to show kind of like the cause and the effect. When we try to conceive unity, and as she puts here in the diagram of meditation, when we try to conceive unity, expanding beyond space or expanding beyond what we know as time, then it creates this groundwork, this substratum, this welling up of courage that we can tap into when the trials and tribulations of daily life come.
Yeah, seeing this in the context of the absolute, we can understand a little more what Blavatsky was trying to do with this meditation when she says, conceive of, the unity by going beyond the sense of space, going beyond the sense of time. Then you are tapping into that state of consciousness that we have been describing, that sense of silent spaciousness where the sense of time ceases. And tapping into that is creating that substratum that Michelle was talking about.
Okay, so here we've taken the first stanza in the Secret Doctrine and reworded it, and then we'll show how we're trying to show the correlation between the absolute and how it looks down here, how it looks in manifestation.
Yeah, because those who are familiar with the first stanza, it describes the night of the universe when there is no manifestation. So the eternal parent, wrapped in her ever invisible robes, had slumber once again for 7 eternities. And so the first shloka talks about space because the eternal parent is the space, Blavatsky says. The second shloka says time was not. You have the original ones?
No. We can go one by one.
Okay, let me just introduce this.
Okay.
So the second says time was not. So this is a description of how the universe was when there was no manifestation. So what we are doing here is, okay, let us apply those descriptions that seem historical descriptions of what happened before manifestation. Let us apply that as a description of the absolute reality that is right now within ourselves and how we can access it.
So the first shloka reworded says, there is only a sense of spaciousness. And this is that spaciousness that we talked about yesterday, that trying to get beyond our lower self so we can dwell in the spaciousness. So,
yeah, so hold on. You read the title, but then I talked. So remember, this is a description of the silent mind. In the silent mind, there is only a sense of spaciousness.
Okay, so this is where there are no thoughts, no emotions, no moods, no memories, no anything like that. And the object is to expand our consciousness so that we embrace this spaciousness and for a moment get beyond. Okay, anything else you want to add? All right, so there is no time, only timeless presence. So this is where we are trying to let go of our memories even more, drop the sense of what's next. So it's kind of that, all right, I have to do this now, I have to do this tomorrow, or this happened in the past. So what we're doing at this time is dropping those parts. There is no thinking mind, only a state of silent awareness. And this is where we leave behind the desire to think, the desire to understand, the desire to gather and comprehend. And we're okay sitting in that, what seems like nothingness. But actually it is just the silent awareness. At first it can be a little scary. We've talked about that before because it's something that we don't know. There is no chasing joy or escaping suffering, only poised awareness. This is where that motion comes in, because if we're constantly going towards pleasure and away from pain, we're creating a push and pull of the lower ego. So here is where we're okay. She says one other place, to get rid of likes, dislikes, and indifference in the diagram of meditation. It's that poised awareness, or what I call that contentedness, that we're trying to seek. The last one is darkness alone fills the boundless all. And this is that darkness, that silent awareness, that poised awareness, that space of seemingly nothingness, but full of everything.
Yeah. So you see, if you compare this with the shlokas, the first one talks about the eternal parent space. The second one, time was not. The third one says the universal mind was not. The fourth one says the search for nirvana and the causes for misery were not. Darkness alone filled the boundless all. So this is both a description of the universe before manifestation and is a description of the silent mind where you are more in touch with the absolute reality in you. So you see that the parallels are very good, and this can be a recipe or a map or, you know, a description of what you are seeking in meditation. You are seeking to go beyond the sense of time, beyond the thinking mind, beyond expecting
Movement.
pleasure or avoiding pain, beyond just dwelling the darkness and of the silent awareness.
Now, it sounds a little weird because in the shloka, it says before manifestation. And since we're already manifested, it seems just an odd saying to get there. So it's, if we're thinking of what we're getting to is before the manifestation of thoughts and emotions and moods.
Yeah, that is, I think, is very important to understand that. And with this, we can take the break. When Blavatsky says that the absolute is not exhausted, the unity is not lost during manifestation, that means that the non-manifested state still exists in the cosmos and in ourselves.
Right.
We can always, the non-manifestation is not something that happened in the past. And now that there is manifestation, we lost it. And then we will regain it when there is a dissolution. Non-manifestation is right now, and that is a place of unity. And that's why in meditation, as we will see more of this, we are seeking that which is right now and is unmanifested.
Okay, so we have a couple questions.
Ad Unterhorst asks, so you are saying the absolute is equal to the first principle?
Yeah, well, depends on what we mean by first principle. You mean the first fundamental proposition?
Or the first cause?
Or the first cause. If it is the first cause, then it wouldn't be. The first cause is the first logos, as we are going to see. If by that you mean the first fundamental proposition, then yes. Or if you mean the first principle as the rootless root, then yes. So, but we will see all that as we go into the logos.
Francine Oler asks, so is the absolute the 0 point?
Yeah, Blavatsky sometimes talks about that, the 0 point or the laya, which is the Sanskrit term for that. Remember that the idea is that the absolute is present on any plane of consciousness. So on the physical plane, there is a manifestation of the absolute. You know, that is not the right way to say, but we don't have any other way. So the absolute is present within Jagrat, within the waking consciousness on the physical plane. The absolute is present in the astral consciousness, on the astral plane. The absolute is present on any plane of consciousness, and that would be the 0 point, the laya point on each plane.
And that's important to remember. In Pablo's last book, Evolution of the Higher Consciousness, there's a chapter on states of consciousness. So, and in it, he says that if we can get to the 0 point of Jagrat, which is the physical plane, then we kind of touch the 0 point on every plane afterwards.
Yeah, that's something that Besant explains, that is a way in which, you know, you can transition from silence to silence, which is how many mystics do, or you can raise your consciousness subplane by subplane. But there is the possibility of when you touch the absolute nature on the physical plane. That means when you are within your physical body, you are in meditation, for example, there is the possibility of raising your consciousness from silence to silence on all these planes.
Ed Moskowitz has two related questions. He asks, in modern language, could duration be called the now? And could absolute space be called the here?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we could call it that way. The now, mystics sometimes call it the eternal now. But yes, in, you know, especially non-dual traditions, they talk about the here and now. As long as here doesn't mean here and not there, and as long as now doesn't mean now and not yesterday.
So even if you use those terms, you have to qualify them within your own
Unfortunately,
thinking. So that's something that if that appeals to you, that's what Blavatsky talked about, then use that, you know, as if absolute abstract space and absolute abstract duration doesn't make sense, using those as long as you're qualifying and using those in the same essence.
yeah, in the right context.
That's it? Okay. All right. So we will take a 10-minute break and start up again, or a little less than 10 minutes, and start up again at 11:15 our time. So 8 minutes your time. All right. Thank you.
All right, we are back.
Okay. Welcome back. And were there any questions over the break? We're good? Okay. All right. We'll take questions again at the end of this little part that we have left. So we're going into the exercises, and as I was doing, going through the slides and preparing for this, I noticed that, as in yesterday, I think I mentioned about the relationship, and I might have mentioned it today, that a lot of what's in spirituality, well, in everything, I think relationship is an absolute principle, an absolute aspect, but is in what relationship do we have with these exercises, or like we said, what relationship do we have with trying, or you know, is our relationship in the sense that we need to succeed, or are we okay with trying, or sitting in something that we don't know. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that always came to me was discipline. I've never been a very disciplined person, and it doesn't have to be a rigid discipline, but a discipline in the sense that this is something that's important to me. I'm going to continue to try and again and again and again as I go on. It's not something that I'm going to wake up, because I think sometimes we think, oh, I'm going to tap into this, you know, higher essence. I'm going to pull from the substratum, and bam, it's just going to come to me. So if I understand that it's about relationships, so the time that I put, the time and energy I put into something, and a discipline that I have to continue to do it, whatever that discipline is. But okay. Oh, and there's always, as a theosophist, there's always with an attitude of service. So you always have to throw that one in. Okay. All right. So to set up a favorable environment, these are just a few little things for a regular spiritual practice. You can follow the suggestions below. So this is part of the discipline. Set a timetable. So how long am I going to do these exercises for? Am I going to do it for a month? Am I going to do it for 2 weeks? Somewhere it came to me that anything you do longer than 40 days sets in. I don't know if that's a proven fact, but I always feel like that, or a month. Anything you do for a month kind of gets into the muscles, and you get that muscle memory of it. So then set reminders, or along with that timetable is how long you're going to do it, how long for you're going to do it, and what times of the days. So if you kind of set something up ahead first, then you can follow through. So set reminders. I used to have sticky notes all over the house to remind me to think this way, to not do that, to be kind to Pablo. Just sticky notes that just because I forget, I get so distracted and I'm so in the day. So I find when I set reminders, either with sticky notes, but I've advanced to my iPhone. So now I set reminders on my iPhone. And then the practice. The practice is, Pablo always says these are his words, an attitude of playing, learning, experimenting. I always have a hard time with that playing part, because I'm, you know, an adult. I have so much to do. I don't have time to play. But there really is something to that part, that if I sit with it and I look at it, that, well, I'm going to give this a try. Let me try this way, not in the sense where I have to set things up so I succeed. And I think that's what he means mostly by the playing part. And then the last one is review and record. I've been looking at a lot of different practices and deeper practices, and they all talk about reviewing at the end of the day, kind of just do a daily review of what you did, how well you did things, how, and in a more objective way. So what went right, what went wrong, but without any attachment to the outcome. This is just what I did. And then record. I know journaling for some people is an amazing aspect. I haven't been able to do that yet, but it's something about getting down on paper what I'm going to do and then following through with that.
And your experience also. When we write
Right.
down, we have to put in order our thoughts around something, around the experience, around what we want to do, etc.
And I think we will be amazed at what comes out of our mind, what we remembered during the day, or how, you know, how it manifested itself. Okay, anything to add? Okay, so now we're going to talk about oneness from, and we mentioned it earlier, from these two perspectives. This first one is from the third person. So this is that there's me, and then there's this oneness outside of me. So
when we discuss this as a philosophy, we normally use the third person language. Like, you know, we talk about the oneness as this thing, you know, there, or the logos, or this or that. These are all objects we talk about. And many times we constantly look at spirituality in that way, the unity, the truth, like all things that are outside of ourselves. It has its own value to look at things in that way, but we need to do more than that. We need to also look at that in the first person, as we will see. But we will start like an exercise, showing, you know, an example of an exercise you can do about the oneness, regarded as an object or something, you know, outside of yourself.
So walk slowly, looking at everything around. As you see the forms, imagine life as an energy informing everything. So part of this is as you're walking,
you know, go to a park or
Right.
the beach or somewhere safe.
or even in your
know.
backyard.
Yeah, your backyard.
Someplace where you can walk, and then try to drop the barriers or the container or the boundaries, and see everything as energy. You know, that I'm connected to the bird and the tree and the grass by an energy system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, normally this sense of boundary it's a big problem for us to perceive unity. Now, this is only because our senses chose to present the world in that way. If instead of, you know, what we call matter, we would be perceiving heat, then we wouldn't see any precise boundaries between two bodies. You know, if you see with the goggles that show the heat signal, you would see that we are interpenetrating each other right now, you know, being next to each other.
Or
if you see the
gradations.
aura. Yeah. So the idea in the exercise is try to think of everything just as condensation of energy, an energy that is feeling everything, and your own body is just a condensation of energy that is constantly exchanging, moving. You know, it's all connected. There are no solid limits.
Okay, and then the second one is don't think of the one life as mere energy, but also as substance. Okay, so now we're kind of shifting. If you haven't noticed, we're shifting from the aspects of the absolute. So we're going from absolute abstract motion to absolute abstract space. So now we're trying to see that there are substance. It's not just this exchange of heat, but there are things, there are stuff out there.
Yeah, but that substance is nothing but a condensation of that energy. So it's a way to try to come and look at how we normally perceive the world without losing sight of the unity behind. Blavatsky always, you know, we mentioned it briefly, but we didn't expound on that. The idea that in Blavatsky always thinks of space as substance. Space and substance are the same principle. So in this case, as Michelle said, even in science, matter is just a condensation of energy. So retaining that sense of one energy behind everything, now you can see how that may seem more solid, like a substance, but it's still the one energy that is constantly being interchanged.
Finally, realize the one life is also consciousness, or spirit was the word we used earlier. As you observe the rocks, plants, and animals around, think that they too are aware, responding to changes in the environment.
So this energy is not only substantial, but it's also aware. Not that the bird is aware and its awareness is different from yours. This all-embracing energy that seems solid is also aware everywhere. So if you only look at a bird, it seems that this bird is aware and you are aware as different. But if you retain the sense of energy interpenetrating everything, that energy is aware, that energy is substantial. So that is a way to try to understand, look at the diversity, trying to anchor yourself in the unity.
And it might be easier, as we're saying, to switch 2 and 3. So to try to perceive the one life as energy, try to perceive the one life as consciousness, and then that condensing the one life into substance. So
yeah, you can change it in any way
you
want.
Okay. All right, and this is from the book. To get a better grasp of this, you may imagine that the outlines that separate yourself from the tree, the bird, all of nature gradually dissolve away. You are now part of the one homogeneous life energy, which also has the quality of awareness, a quiet awareness of oneness. Then imagine that this life energy begins to condense back into the outlines of separate objects, and this awareness becomes embodied and is limited to your individual body and mind. Thus, the matter, energy, and awareness that is at the basis of everything is one single principle.
Yeah, so you can use a visualization however it works with you. These are just examples of how you can try to work so that you see, even though you see separation, you have the sense of the unity behind.
Right. And yeah, and you could go both ways, go from, the energy to the condensation, go from the condensation to the energy. So, okay, oneness from the first person. So this is, I am the oneness. Start by sitting or standing in a place with nature around. Make an effort to avoid limiting your consciousness to the body you occupy at this time and to the place where your body
is.
You can now start walking in nature at a slow pace. Pause frequently, expanding your sphere of consciousness as you silently dwell in the subtle feeling of pervading the space around you. So in the third person, or the previous one, there were no boundaries. You were the space or the oneness. Here, you're starting from a reference point of you and then expanding from there to encompass all in this spaciousness.
Yeah, so in a certain sense, in the first exercise, the space is outside of yourself. The oneness is outside of yourself. And of course, you try to visualize yourself as part of that oneness. Here, this would be you expand yourself into oneness. So normally, as we walk, for example, we feel that we are contained within the body. But the truth is the opposite. The body is contained within you. You as the sphere of consciousness. The body is within you, not you within the body. So as you walk, for example, you can make a subtle effort to have the sense that you are the whole space, embracing all the objects that are there, the bird, the tree, and what you call your body. These are all objects within your sphere of consciousness. If you were not aware of them, they wouldn't be there. You wouldn't see them, perceive them, notice that they are there. So you as awareness, you are always beyond everything that you perceive. So this is a way in which, from the first person point of view, as we said, I am the oneness containing everything. Not so much I am contained in the oneness. You know, the first example is I am contained in the oneness. The second is I am the oneness containing everything. And it's useful to work in the two ways. Normally, we tend not to work too much in the first person perspective. You know, everything is contained within me. Again, me not as the personality, me as the oneness.
Okay, I think that's it. Oh, sorry. To get a better grasp of this, you may imagine that the outlines that separate yourself from the tree, the bird, all of nature.
Isn't that the same we read before?
No, I don't think so. Oh, maybe
Yeah,
it
you
is.
were going the
Oh,
opposite.
wrong way. I thought we were done. Okay, I thought we were done. Sorry. So, yeah, did you have some more to add?
No. Just the idea is, you know, again, we may study about oneness, about the absolute, etc. But the idea is that, as we showed yesterday, what the masters and Blavatsky always said is that if they are giving this information, it's not to add to the mass of theory that is out there. They did it because they believe that this has a practical impact on your life. So there are many spiritual practices. Most of the spiritual practices that are commonly known, to be blunt, let's say, they are based on a mistake. They are based on the illusion, the illusion that you are a separate individual. So, of course, they are useful to some extent, and that's how we all start the spiritual practices, from the point of view I'm the individual, and there is nothing wrong with them. But at some point, we need to start producing a kind of revolution in our consciousness and changing more radically how we begin to perceive ourselves and life. So these exercises, I think what Blavatsky and the masters were trying to do in producing this literature that talks about the cosmic aspects, is so that we can take it from the cosmic perspective. You know, many people who have a superficial approach to this literature, they tend to feel, you know, all this is theoretical out there. What does it matter? There is, and it's also the fault of the presenters, who many times themselves have not tried to interpret this in more practical terms. But part of what we are trying to show here is that this is very practical, and it's a spiritual approach that is not easily available. All traditions in their deeper aspects, they have these things, you know, and we are not claiming this is unique to theosophy. The problem is that in most traditions, it's difficult to get there. This is traditionally reserved to people who commit to that life. They are monks, or, you know, however they call them. I think part of what the theosophical tradition has done is to bring all to the public. It is here, and we all can use it. So we will continue to show different aspects of the secret doctrine, and how we can apply them, how we can practice those teachings.
And
Yeah,
to me, the whole aim or the whole purpose is to get like the keys, the psychological key that we talked about. If I understand the psychological key, then I can apply that to anything I read. Mm-hmm. And bring it into, you know, my everyday life, my everyday practice, what I'm doing. If I understand, you know, life from the oneness from the first person versus the third person, then I can take anything that I do or how I'm reacting and use that to enhance my practice without having to constantly depend on somebody that I have to ask somebody, am I doing this right? Or do I have this? So the idea to me is to make us more self-sufficient in our practice with using, teachers and guidance and things like that when we get stuck, but not to have someone every step of the way.
Mhm. Yeah, basically, what this is saying is everything is inside of you. You just have to learn how to search for it.
Right, right. Okay.
Question, comments out there?
We have a comment from Fiona Craig, who says, Tai Chi is a good way of grounding, and very soon there is a connection with the universe. I find that being barefoot in nature is the most effective in becoming connected.
Yes.
There are a lot of practices that not enhance, that favor that connection with the ground in order to pull from there, that which we are, our essence.
I always think, whatever helps, just use it. For some people, yoga is great, or Tai Chi. For some other people, is boring, or this or that. I think whatever helps, use it. Eventually, what we want to be able to do is to be able to access this without any external aid. Because, when your boss is yelling at you, it's a little awkward if you start doing Tai Chi. So you can start by, using the tools of Tai Chi or meditation or walking slowly or whatever helps you, and that's very valuable. But eventually, we need to get to a place where we have a connection with this, so that in any circumstances, we can try to step back into, that wider perspective. So both things is important to keep in mind. Use any helpful tool, and also try to little by little learn to access that without the help of any tool.
Right, and that goes back to the substratum. With our practice, we're building the substratum. So from this originates a substratum of memory, which does not cease in dreaming or waking. Its manifestation is courage. With memory of universality, all dread vanishes during the dangers and trials of life. So that is the tool that we can access anywhere at any time once we've built it first. Okay.
Other comment, question?
All right. So it looks like that's all we have for today. Do you have?
Yeah, I would give a little more time. We just finished talking in case somebody has a little, comment or question.
I can put this up.
Yeah. So let me say something going back to what was asked about if the absolute is the first principle. I was just
said that in a quote.
Yeah, I was just thinking, of course we can say that. This always depends on what we mean by the words. The words are used in different ways, and Blavatsky is the queen of changing the meaning of words. Unfortunately, we would like to have one word for one thing and never change, and that's not how she writes.
But that's a practice in itself. That's to me, a very spiritual practice in getting our mind, our concrete mind, to relax and let go. And so to work into the higher order.
That's exactly, and she said it, that was her purpose. It's like you have to read, but not be fixed on the concept. You have to relax, in a sense, your consciousness and see between the lines and the words. But what I was going to say is that usually HPB try to avoid using the idea of first for the absolute, because the first principle, meaning first within time, the first from which will come the second and the third, as we said, tends to be more the first logos. She would say, I suppose the absolute is the eternal principle, and then the ideation would be the first logos or the first principle. So normally, if we want to be picky about words, we would say the absolute is the eternal principle. The first logos is the first principle to differentiate.
Okay, looks like we have another question.
Lionel Bellini
Mhm.
asks, does Theosophy say anything specifically on sun gazing during meditation?
Mhm. Yes, it says don't.
And let me throw in there, and don't for the moon either. The moon,
Yeah, yeah.
it gets wrapped in there
But
too.
the principle of gazing to something without moving fixing your sight, the scientific principle there is one of what we know as hypnosis. As we said, whatever becomes a constant stimuli, consciousness stops working there. So when you start looking at something, you fix your eyes on something, a spot on the wall, a candle flame, the sun, the tip of the nose. When you fix, what happens is that the eye nerves begin to fall into a kind of paralysis. And because the eyes are connected to the brain, that paralysis goes little by little to the brain. And then that produces a state of trance. Now, from the theosophical point of view, if I can use these words, it's a cheap way of generating a trance, in the sense that, yes, there are a lot of tricks we can use to generate a state of trance. The problem is that when we artificially stop the brain by these ways, or swirling, or repeating a mantra constantly, etc., what you do is you stop the brain, but it's like consciousness gets trapped within an organ that doesn't work. So when you come out of the trance, it felt nice as a very deep sound
Kind of
sleep.
like a rest, yeah.
Yeah,
A rest.
but you come with no insight, with nothing added to your state of consciousness. It's just a trance. What theosophy proposes is something far more difficult, far slower in its results, but something that will change your life little by little. That is, don't try to trick your constitution by putting it in this kind of trance. Learn to raise your consciousness, retaining the awareness. When your body is left behind because your awareness is beyond the body, then you are fully aware on the inner planes. And then you can have insights that are closer to reality. So Blavatsky would always say there are two lines in spirituality that she called Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. And she used Hatha Yoga not in the way we use it now. She would say the Hatha Yoga, in her view, is trying to use all these tricks and shortcuts. And it's related to developing psychic powers, to awakening Kundalini, to all these things. And then she would say the Raja Yoga has nothing to do with that. It is the development of awareness, deepening of awareness, development of wisdom, love, compassion, etc. So she would say, if you go the route of the Hatha Yoga that uses all these methods, what you get is not going to change you or your life. The results are rather superficial. They may be impressive. Now you see auras, wow, but how does it change you? You are in the same confusion that before. I, as a scientist, could see a world that most of you don't know, the world of bacteria and DNA, etc. How does that make me more spiritual? It doesn't. Same thing if you see auras or hear astral bells. So the theosophical tradition doesn't rely on those methods. And also, this is a medical fact also, if you look at the sun or at a flame for a long time, you will ruin your sight. In the East, they didn't care. Actually, many of the yogis, would on purpose damage their senses because they thought the senses only bring distraction. So if you are happy with that, with going blind or something, no, seriously, you can use those methods. But in the West, we normally don't. We appreciate our senses, so it's not recommended.
So the idea, and we talked about this on a slide, the idea is not to dull the senses or remove yourself from the senses, but to stay engaged and transform, purify the senses, and use that to propel yourself on the spiritual path.
Yeah.
I do want to ask one
Yes.
question though, because you talk about sun gazing and you talk about it in the sense of being a trance.
Mhm.
And I know I've read that, I don't know if it's Blavatsky or the masters use the word trance. And we already clarified that you can't use the definition.
Words are used in different ways.
So
yes, HPV sometimes would talk about samadhi as trance, but she means a state of consciousness beyond the body, while the how trance is normally understood is more a state of non-awareness. You are in meditation and then you wake up 3 hours later, you have no idea what happened. Since it is weird, you feel special. Wow,
it's an experience. It's an experience.
But it doesn't bring, I think this is why it's important in the theosophical tradition, you do comparative study. There is a whole mass of literature that uses all those methods. And all these paths are related. And you can try them. As I always say, the Theosophical Society is not a church to say, this is sin, this is the approved path. There are things that theosophical literature says this is not, helpful, but you are the one that has to decide. So there is a whole mass of literature that uses all these methods. All these paths are related and they go in one direction. If you start reading other kind of literature, Advaita Vedanta, Dzogchen, let's say, I don't know, the Neoplatonists, etc., Christian mysticism, all these other body of literature uses opposite methods in many ways. It's all about developing your awareness, your insight, your ability to let the personality behind. So if you study comparatively enough, you will start differentiating both kinds of literatures, and you can, decide what really works.
Right, and like you said, words fail us, but there's not right and wrong. But in Theosophy, it's pretty clear that our evolutionary goal is to get back to this oneness. And the only way we've read, not the only way, but that to get to this oneness is to get beyond our senses. So if the path that we choose is still involving our senses or dulling them, or because you could do that with drugs too, then the aim of reaching a self-aware, self-realized consciousness with oneness or perception of oneness, this may just take the long way around. And because I came to Theosophy through the New Age movement, and it was very helpful for me in the beginning because I wasn't a philosopher, I wasn't, an intellect or academic, academic. So this was awesome for me to get started. It answered some of my questions, but then it took me to a certain point, and then I thought, this is a little self-serving, and I just didn't feel that could. So I found Theosophy from there. So any starting point is okay, knowing what the final goal is, and knowing that the difference of dulling and purifying.
Yes, this I think is a difference between the Eastern view and the view that Theosophy brings. Many people think that the Theosophical view is Eastern, and people who belong to Hinduism and Buddhism, they always complain that they say that Theosophy is different from what they propose, and it is true. Essentially, it is different in many ways. One of the ways is that normally in the Eastern view, the world, the body, these are all illusions. These are all obstacles. What you have to do is to shut off the world, the body, to retrieve from the world. And what the Theosophical tradition says is that that's not
Can I stop you there
Yeah.
before you go? And then that, because it just came to me, the cultural lifestyle in the East fits that, because they're not saying, I mean, obviously some do, but they're saying, okay, so you're a child, you go to college, you become a worker, you become a family man, now you're a retired person. This is when you start this spiritual path, to go away or something like that. So that kind of fits that. It makes sense.
Yeah, what Michelle
that.
is saying is that in traditional Hinduism, for example, you have these stages of life, and spirituality for most people begin when they retire from work, when they finish raising their family, sons, daughters, they are married, and then they retire from the world, they go to the forest traditionally, not that
Right.
people do that, most
Right.
people. But the basic metaphysical idea behind is that Theosophy says there is a reason why senses have been developed. There is a reason why we incarnate in a physical body. There is a reason why there is all this. If you try to just dull the senses, shut the world off, etc., you are saying that there is something wrong with manifestation. So Theosophy, or the Theosophical tradition, says there is nothing wrong with manifestation. What we need to learn is how to relate to our senses, to manifestation, etc., from the point of view of the real. It's easy enough to close your eyes and not see any
A dirty
conflict.
house.
A dirty house, yes. So that's easy enough, but that's not the purpose. Can you live in the world with your eyes open, but from the point of view of the true perception? That is far more difficult, but in the Theosophical tradition, is the only thing that really you keep for all eternity. Dulling the senses doesn't give your consciousness the ability not to be fooled by the senses. So you dull your senses in this incarnation, next incarnation you will be in the same place.
Okay.
Fiona Craig comments, there are ways of accessing the relaxation effects of Tai Chi in meditation. The mode can be transferred into everyday life by a type of mastery.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with anything.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is to what you do in the sitting meditation or sitting practice, or even,
Or the
like
Tai
a
Chi
slow
practice,
meditative
yeah.
practice, is to take that and transfer it into our daily lives. That's the goal in theosophical meditations, or in the walking exercise that we mentioned.
Yeah. The idea is, that again, in modern spirituality, we tend to separate the spiritual life. We think the spiritual life is a collection of techniques that you do, and then you live your normal life with the same prejudices and problems, etc. So the idea is that the meditation is not just when you practice Tai Chi or you practice sitting meditation or yoga. That has to be extended into daily life, as Fiona is saying.
Okay.
Ed Moskowitz says, in response to your discussion about Blavatsky's loose use of terminology,
Mm-hmm.
other languages are less concrete than English. Sanskrit, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and she even says that. She said, this is what I have to work with. The English language, I don't know what her wording of it is, but is useless, or not useless.
And
but,
not only the English, she said modern languages,
right.
Are hopeless, I think she says.
Hopeless. Okay,
yeah. She would say Sanskrit traditionally is said to be the language of the gods, the Devanagari. Deva means God, and Devanagari is the script of Sanskrit. So the idea is that this language was given by the gods. That's the tradition, but according to Blavatsky, it hides a true fact that it is a language that is more geared toward the spiritual. Our modern languages are great languages for material advancement, for science, for business, for everything, and they are very well adapted to that, but they are not well adapted to the spiritual realities.
Pablo mentioned the state of trance from stargazing, etc. what is the difference between that and concentration or contemplation in meditation?
Mhm.
It's,
Mhm.
yeah,
Mhm.
it's basically where your consciousness goes.
Mhm.
So in the trance that we were talking about, from, you know, watching the tip of your nose or repeating a mantra mindlessly, and that's it. You're taking the mind, the higher mind out of it. You're taking the consciousness out of it. And what we're trying to do is improve that. So I can, if I want my house clean, to stay clean, I can put my kids in the other, in one room and never let them out, and it stays clean, but they never learn to keep a clean house. So it's that,
We can
it's that,
push the lower consciousness.
right,
Yeah,
well,
but,
yeah,
or,
that's the analogy to
yeah.
the child. We can push that lower consciousness out or hold it back, or dull it, but then we don't learn, we don't grow, we don't, you know, purify. It's in that.
Yes. For example, Patanjali would say what results from concentration depends on what you are concentrating on. So, you know, concentration is samadhi in Sanskrit, in Patanjali. Again, samadhi is translated in many ways, but basically sama means bring together. You know, samadhi is concentration, a deep concentration. And he would say there are several levels of samadhi which are pretty useless from a spiritual point of view. If you want a samadhi that will bring spiritual insight, you need to have a samadhi on a spiritual principle. If you concentrate on lower objects, you may get even some knowledge of those lower objects, but it's not spiritual knowledge. Like, for example, if you see the description that Einstein gave us when he came to the theory of relativity, he went into samadhi basically, because he was following very precisely and in a very focused way this line of reasoning, and of course he was a spiritual person from a certain perspective. That's why he had the ability to focus on this in that way. But the knowledge that came out of this samadhi is a knowledge about the laws of nature. It's a scientific knowledge. He perceived how, you know, certain laws of nature work. This is what Patanjali says. You can learn how the sun works by meditating on the sun. You can learn how, you know, the moon works by meditating on the moon.
So it goes with that what you put your energy towards is what you're going to get back. You're not going to meditate on science and come to a spiritual.
Yeah. So
revelation.
basically, this is why in the Theosophical tradition you do concentration and meditation on spiritual subjects, because the insights that you will get are spiritual insights. Now, in the process of practicing concentration, you can use more concrete things. You focus on your breathing, you focus on this, on that, because you are learning to put your mind there. Now, normally it's not recommended for physiological reasons that you concentrate by fixing your gaze with your eyes open somewhere. It's different if you open your eyes and you let your gaze rest, not fixed on anything, that's fine. But fixing your gaze has physiological problems, you know, with that, which any professional scientist would tell you. So concentration is normally more for the mind. If you use a concrete object, you have to be careful with fixing the eyesight.
Okay.
Maria Parison asks, please explain more about becoming aware on the inner planes. What are these inner planes?
Yes, I would say
In
that.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
2 more questions.
Okay.
I would say, you know, it seems there are different ways, the two ways that we were talking about. There is a way to be aware on the different planes by going subplane by subplane, which that means that you start perceiving what, you know, subtle energies and what is happening on the astral plane and the mental plane, etc. But again, perception on those planes are not necessarily spiritual. They are just an enlarging of perception. But there is the other way that Besan wrote about, where you can go from the silence on the physical plane to a deeper silence on the astral plane, to a deeper silence on the mental plane. And each state of silence is closer to the absolute reality, is closer to the true self, is closer to truth. So mystics normally follow that path. They go deeper and deeper in the cloud of unknowing, in the divine darkness, for example, of the Areopagite, Pseudo Dionysius. So when I particularly mention, consciousness on the inner planes, I mention more that the idea of getting deeper and deeper into silence, because when you come back, I mean, not at that moment, but the effect of that is that you start seeing the world differently, not as something that happens, you do a meditation, you come back and now you see it differently. The regular practice of going deeper into silence begins to produce a transformation where you start, sensing more the real and sensing more what is illusion.
And it's a critical mass. It's building that substratum that Blavatsky talks about. It's not, I'm going to do this and then I get this. So I'm doing this and I'm building something from which I can transform my daily perception.
Mm-hmm.
Comment from Ed Moskowitz. He says, this reminds me of the Zen. First, mountains are mountains, then mountains are not mountains. Finally, mountains are mountains.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a nice koan or saying in the Zen tradition.
Finally, I have a question from Fiona Craig. I think Michelle said something about meditation in the moon, did she?
Movement.
No,
you said don't meditate on the moon. Yeah, that's a long story also. HPB was not very fan of the moon. She said the energies of the moon are not all that healthy. I know that there are many traditions.
I know, and that's the only way I found out about it, because a lodge had sent an email and asked me, it's a full moon, what can we do to celebrate it? And so I started looking up and I was like, oh dear. Well.
Yeah, there is more there than we know.
Right.
So we can't give a definite answer.
But in
HPV
general,
would say that the moon, she said several times, has not a very positive effect on our psyche.
Because it's not a light of its own as the sun is basically.
Yeah, that's a very long subject.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
Jocelyn Amaya asks, when you say silence, do you mean keeping the mind silent and just observing?
Mm-hmm. We look into this more. Yes and no. At the beginning, it's helpful to be able to let the mind rest with no thoughts, because normally it is only then that you can start perceiving things that are subtler. But eventually, once you get to know that subtler aspect or state, you can retain it even though there may be thoughts or emotions.
But getting the thoughts to stop, that could be or getting to the silence of the mind can be years of practice. Yeah.
I mean, we always,
it's that segue, you start with the mind moving at warp speed, then you get to the ideal of the silence of beyond the mind, but there's a whole big central part of that is calming the mind and quieting the mind.
Yeah, and it's not an all or nothing. As the mind gets calmer, it's like the silence begins to trickle down. You start getting more and more in touch with the real, let's say. Eventually, yes, you develop the ability to just drop thinking for a while, but then
I can't picture that point, but yes, I trust that it will be there. So, okay.
All right.
So thank you for sharing your day with us, or your evening, or your early morning, whatever time it is where you are. And we will be here tomorrow, same time, same link, Same
No,
link?
different link.
Oh, different link. Sorry, different link that you will have. But we're good. Thank you, everybody who
Yeah, hosted.
you hosted it, made it happen, and we'll see you tomorrow.